Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out to tonight's special meeting. Next regular board meeting will be next Monday, November the 22nd at 6 o'clock. Board, you've been emailed an agenda. So I'll entertain a motion that we approve the agenda as it was presented.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Mr. Caldwell, second. All in favor?
Aye.
And public comment. Everybody?
Are we in favor of the pledge today?
We didn't get our flags yet, so.
I have a flag pin on mine. I can help you hold it up.
Hold the flag
I
up.
think it would be appropriate because you voted on that.
We can do that, yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah, we can do
Or
that.
you can put it up on the screen.
And do you have could you shoot an image of the flag on the screen for us? See it through the window?
Actually, I think it's pulled down. I was having it on.
I'll document it up there.
Do it, Adam.
Well, there's a bit of a flag in that portrait back there. It's not a real
That's
flag, but
even-
it's
that'd be even better.
an image of a flag.
That is black.
Use that.
We can do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
That's all right. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And I apologize for not having the flags yet, but we're all a victim of supply chain issues and almost everything we're ordering right now. So the last email I got said that it would be here in early December. So that's as specific as they would get.
Very good. Thank you for that. Next, we have public comment. We have Mr. George Elver signed up for public comment.
Good evening, I'm George Elver. I'm a resident of Clay County. My daughter goes to school here. I don't think it's been a secret that I've been against the masking of our children ever since the beginning. I do remember, if it's correct or not, I think I'm pretty close to it, that when we went from it being a choice for the parents to have that medical decision about their children to being mandatory by the school board. The reason was to keep the numbers of quarantine down in the hopes that school would not have to be shut down. And yet, during the time of the mask, I would say up to this point, looking back at all the numbers, the quarantine numbers were always super high compared to the amount of kids that actually had COVID. I think at one point, when I was looking at the numbers, it was for every one student that had COVID, there was 12 students that were quarantined. So I don't, at least in my opinion, the mask didn't seem to have stopped the crazy number of kids being quarantined. And to that point, there was, I know I brought it up at one of the other meetings, there was also kids that were being put on quarantine that didn't have an exposure, never occurred. Their parents never reported anything, and they were just put on a quarantine list and not allowed to come to school. So with that in mind, and adding in the fact that there have been multiple studies, I think the latest has come out of India and out of Israel in regards to the amount of damage that masking does both physically and mentally to the children. I would have to say that looking at the agenda and from what I've been told, that the choices that we have here today or that the board has to make is to either, one, end the masking of our children now, I believe effective on the 15th or 16th. And then the others would be, I don't remember the dates exactly, but after Thanksgiving or after Christmas. I don't think that we should wait and keep our children masked, causing more damage to them when there's no reason to. Specifically, I think there's one kid quarantined at this point on the release from today, I believe. You know, there's no active cases and only one on quarantine. I don't see why we would have to wait for anything. I mean, there are studies that show it causes damage to our children, and why take that risk when there's no reason whatsoever? At least give the parents their rights back in making those decisions for their children. Time's up.
Yes, sir.
All right. I just ask, please remove the obedience mask from my children now, and just remember it's your decision as the board. Other people may weigh in, teachers, parents, everyone else, but at the end of the day, you're the one who make the vote. So please do so.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Cole, you gonna discuss some stuff real
Just
quick?
real quick.
Thank you, members of the board. Just really quick, before you get set to make your decision, I just, as always, wanted to go through and just provide you with all the information that you asked for. We've been gathering this information over the last couple of weeks since the last board meeting at your request. I've presented you with 3 options. Obviously, you're the board. You don't have to follow any of these. You can do whichever ones. These just seem to be the logical 3 options that I could come up with. So first of all, option 1 would be to just make masks optional for everyone effective tomorrow. I spoke with the principals today, and I believe that we can make that happen. It will cause us to have to change in some situations how we do our lunches and lunch duties, because the kids may end up being in different locations than where they are now. But we feel like we can make it happen tomorrow in order to make that option available if that's what the board requests. The board had requested information on the surrounding counties and how their COVID numbers had done since they went mask optional. So Cherokee has been mask optional for 3 weeks, and Graham County and Macon County went mask optional about 2 weeks ago. Cherokee and Graham have seen no additional spikes in their numbers since they went mask optional. Macon County has seen a spike in their numbers, but they have not been able to directly tie that to the schools. It's just they had a spike across their county 2 weeks after they went mask optional in their schools, but that may just be a correlation and not causation. They don't really know. Certainly, I think if you chose option 1, those that do not want to wear a mask, it would definitely be more comfortable, and that would certainly make them happy. So that's another positive. I do think that, or I know that teaching reading is much easier when you can see mouths and faces. So I do think that would have a positive impact. On the negative side of things, per the health department, moving back to mask optional would move us back to a 6 feet social distancing requirement when we do have a positive. So when they came in to do contact tracing with our school nurses, we would be back to 6 feet. Kids who had been within 6 feet of them for 15 minutes or more over a 24-hour period, as opposed to 3 feet, which is what we use when everyone is masked up. So by relation, when you have a positive, you have a chance of having more quarantines than you would. So that could be a possible negative impact, but that's tied to the fact of whether we have positives or not. And as was mentioned earlier in public comment, right now we only have 1 positive kid in the whole school district. If it stays that way, that's not going to matter. So, it just depends. That's one of those things we can't predict. I'm just saying that if we did have more positives, in all likelihood we would have more quarantines because we would be under a 6-foot rule as opposed to a 3-foot rule. Those that have not been vaccinated would be at a higher risk of exposure and possible quarantine. I say that in particular for 5 to 11-year-olds, just because the 5 to 11-year-olds, the parents that want to have their children vaccinated in that age category, they haven't had the time to get them fully vaccinated yet. The shots have to be, I think it's 21 days apart, and then it's 2 weeks after the second shot before you're considered fully vaccinated. So you actually need about 5 weeks in order to have an opportunity to have those kids be fully vaccinated according to the health department and CDC guidelines. So that's a negative for those parents, and of course that would be those parents that wanted to have their kids fully vaccinated before we went mask optional. It is possible that if we do have some more positives and quarantines as a result of going mask optional immediately, that it could impact state testing at the high school. Remember that the high school operates on a semester schedule instead of a year-long schedule, and by law the state exams happen during the last 5 days of the semester, which is the last 5 days before we get out for Christmas break. So roughly a few weeks from now, if we went mask optional, if we had a spike, it could possibly impact that when you count into any kid that was positive or quarantined as a result. If you span out 14 days, it could have an impact. So it's possible. Again, I can't predict if that'll happen or not. That just depends on what happens with the COVID numbers. And of course, I mentioned this at our last meeting. Just over the past couple of years, large holidays have had an impact. So people travel during Easter, during Thanksgiving and Christmas in particular. They mix and mingle, they bring stuff back. Again, I don't know if that'll happen or not, but I do worry about the fact that we have Thanksgiving and Christmas here back to back. That's a prime opportunity for some mixing. So I don't know if that'll happen or not. We'll see. Option 2 would be initiate the above changes and tentatively plan to make mask optional on December 15th if the quarantining remains less than 5% of the total student population. I would say the positives to that approach would be the 5 to 11-year-olds would have had the required time to be fully vaccinated if their parents chose that for them. This would also be over 10 days after the Thanksgiving holiday, which would allow us to see if there's any additional spread that happens as a result of a major holiday like Thanksgiving. And then option 3 would be to tentatively set January 5th as the effective date for optional masking if quarantine percentages stay below 5% of the total student population. January 5th is the first day back from Christmas, New Year's Day break. That's that Monday when we get back. So at that point, the fall testing at the high school would be over, so we wouldn't have to worry about an impact of that. Both of the large holidays would be over. The next one would be Easter, which is sometime in the spring. And all parents would have had ample opportunity to get all of their children vaccinated if they so chose. Regardless, I put this in red on the second page of your agenda. Regardless of your decision tonight, students that ride the bus would still have to wear masks because buses fall under federal guidelines. The board doesn't have control over transportation. So either way, no matter what is decided by the board as far as during the school day, the requirement would not change for buses. And I know that they get off the bus and they take their mask off, but those are the rules. And our funding for buses comes from the federal government, so we have to follow those guidelines. As far as our numbers, again, the improvement has continued, and between last week and this week, the total number on the far right, the total number of students and staff isolated or quarantined across the district has gone from 8 people to 1. So you can see we've pretty much got it licked. We had, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, we did have a couple of high school kids test positive. But because the way we have things set up now, there were no quarantines as a result. When the health department and school nurses did contact tracing, there were no quarantines as a result of those positives. And that's due to what we have in place right now. The school district and the leadership team are prepared to do whatever the board wishes. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I don't think that there are any. Me personally, I don't think there are any right or wrong choices on this. There are different choices that have different positives and consequences as a result. And the only other thing I included was just I got a late email from the 3rd grade team at the elementary school today that I just put in your folder for the board to review. I felt like I needed to include that. I didn't get time to include it on the PowerPoint because it came in so late, but you do have that as well. Are there any questions for me from the board?
Any questions or comments?
On the buses, it's just the yellow buses, right?
That is correct.
It doesn't include the activity buses?
That is correct. The county commissioners pay for the white buses.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Very good. Any comments or discussion on any of those 3 options? And of course, I guess the other option would be to stay, obviously the 4th option would be.
Well, the 4th option would be to just keep doing what you're doing, yes. Yeah.
I'll entertain a motion or discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I would like, if we can, to entertain motion for option 1. Mask optional tomorrow.
So Mr. Caldwell is making a motion that we go with option 1, which is make mask optional beginning tomorrow morning, Tuesday, November the 16th.
I'll second.
Mr. Jones seconds that. All in favor? Any opposed?
I do have an issue with it because while we've heard a very compelling argument in favor of doing that, but I really appreciate the 3rd grade teachers' viewpoint on that. That, you know, that we would do everything that we could to make sure that the kids are able to have in-person learning. So I'm concerned about that.
So we've got that concern. Mr. Caldwell has made a motion that we go with option 1. There's been a second to that motion. There's been 3 ayes, correct? Yep. So, I know that's a concern, and obviously the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services has not changed their guidelines with regards to quarantine, and that's the risk that we take, obviously, with doing that, is the increase in the number of quarantines if somebody does test positive. But we have a motion, and that we have votes in favor of that motion. So,
Is it all in favor? All in favor?
well, there were 3 ayes, and then if Ms.
You're
Beck.
not. You are not.
No, I'm not voting.
So that vote would pass 3-1 on motion 1, which would be making mask optional. Excuse me, beginning tomorrow, November the 16th.
And members of the board, I'd just like to mention too, so we have a policy in place right now that was approved in July or August. That was option A, which required face masks. Your vote tonight means that we'll be moving to the option B policy, which I've included in your folder. So you have an opportunity to just kind of read what that says. But essentially it says that the board understands the guidance from the CDC and Health Department and Health and Human Services, but at this time are making masks optional as a parent choice, and that this does not apply to yellow buses. That's essentially what it says. So, but if you have any questions about that, you can let me know. And again, regardless of this, you're required by law to vote on this every month moving forward. So, I mean, you know, you're not, this puts it in place for this month, and then you'll review it again. Maybe not next week, but
But in
maybe in
December.
December, yes.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask, would we have to?
You only required to do it once a month, but this is your vote for November, so we'll just wait until the December meeting in order to address it.
Mr. Chairman, we also put in here a couple months also for Mr. Cole, in case there was a spike, that he did not have to ask us, that he could go back to full mask in case, correct? So
That's, well, if we got to a point where we were getting close to not having enough staff to have school, and we felt like it was either that or shut a school down, then, you know, I would have the ability to do that if needed in an emergency situation. Obviously, right now, our numbers, we're a long ways from an emergency situation.
but also, I thought that also that included that if you've seen a spike in the students also, it's students and teachers is the way I thought we had voted on.
Yes.
So therefore, if you see a spike in teachers for that you can do it, and then you give an all call to the Board of Education members and do that.
I could, but if I were to do that, I would probably ask for a quick special meeting as soon as I could get y'all together. Yes.
Very good. Any other questions or comments? If not, then I'll entertain a motion that we go into closed session to discuss personnel.
I'll make a motion.
Ms. Crawford,
I'll second.
Ms. Beck, second. All in favor?
Aye.